Much better. We had agreed that by popular demand we would be doing some Emunah out of Sephardi Center. I happen to be a tremendous fan of learning Tanakh. It's unfortunate that no one else is, so it's just not learned. There's a bit of a history to this. Kedai to understand a little bit that it used to be common, at least certainly amongst the Sephardim, and in some cases amongst many Ashkenazim as well, that Tanakh was studied in yeshivot. That sounds like a very bizarre thing. Why wouldn't we study Tanakh? So on the one hand, you had the Christians who would look through Tanakh and try to find proofs to their religion. You had the Muslims who wanted to, based on a few psukim in Yeshaya, whatever, that there should be proof for their religion too. And at the same time, at least in northern and central and a little bit of Eastern Europe, you had the Maskilim, many of whom did kind of like Tanakh, because taken out of context and without Torah Shebe'al Peh, it's very easy to invent all sorts of bizarre ideas. So they did, on the one hand, many of them came to appreciate the Zionist concept. At the same time, they would often ask very challenging questions on Torah Shebe'al Peh or Torah Shebichtav. So it became popular maybe 150 years ago in many shivot that the Tanakh just wasn't studied at all. Sometimes, even today, it's a favorite topic amongst the what they call in Hebrew Bikurat HaMikra, the Bible critics. They like to look for issues and questions in the Tanakh. And Sefer Iyov happens to be a particularly unique sefer. Why is this? Because of all the Sephardim we have in the Tanakh, this is the only one about which there is a genuine and legitimate dispute as to who the author of the sefer was. In fact, who was Iyov himself? Megillat Esther, okay, so we know the characters, we know the context, we know the time frame, you know what happened before, you know what happened after, and you have the story of what happened in the middle. We know when Daniel lived, we know Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, I mean all of our prophets, in fact they're chronological for the first few. We have Yoshua, Shoftim, Melachim Aleph, Melachim Bet. And then comes Sefer Iyov. There is a dispute in the Gemara, so the first chapter of Masechet Bava Batra, where the Gemara explains that there's a multitude of opinions regarding Iyov, in which generation he lived, and in fact who he was. One opinion holds it was Adam Harishon. Another opinion holds it was Abraham, it was Yitzchak, it was Yaakov, it was Moshe Rabbeinu. And we actually have an opinion that says Iyov lo haya v'lo nivra. There is a legitimate opinion in the Gemara that says Sefer Iyov is not the story of a particular man or a particular individual, but rather a prophetic parable, like a prophetic metaphor, so to speak, for challenges, complications, trials, tribulations, nisyonot in Olam Hazeh. Very easy to understand then that someone studying Sefer Iyov for the first time has where to get confused. The books of the Tanakh, generally speaking, they read, more or less easily and kind of straightforward. So if you do start to take a sefer from the Tanakh, Sefer Shoftim, Sefer Melachim, the order is pretty much chronological. You begin with one shofet, who was followed by another, followed by a third, by a fourth, etc. Sefer Melachim, we have kings who preceded others, those who succeeded them. The kingdom started falling apart. You have Malchei Israel, Malchei Yehuda. But at least there's some kind of rhyme, reason to the story. Iyov is really hard to get a handle on because the sefer itself is not concretely attached to a particular generation. This opinion says no, Iyov lo haya v'lo nivra, never was and was never created. The whole thing is just a mashal, it's just a parable we should learn from. Right away the Gemara attacks this opinion. There was a man in the land of Uz and his name was Iyov. So it's telling you there is such a reference in the sefer itself. And the Gemara's response is no, maybe this too is part of the parable, not necessarily that there was such a person, but that the hypothetical situation has a character with a name to it. To make this even more interesting, a little bit of a cultural reference, you may or may not be familiar with the Wizard of Oz, but if you are, Oz is the English cognate, in other words, the transliteration of Uz, the land from which Iyov comes. He's referred to as Iyov from the land of Uz, Ain Waw Tzadi in Hebrew. So the Wizard of Oz was actually a very overt reference to Sefer Iyov, where it's not so clear who he was and where he was from. Oz is almost this magical land that doesn't exist. You have what to learn from it, but it's not a kind of tangible place. In the end, you just click your heels together and you're back in Kansas, and everything is okay. So, even the secular non-Jewish culture somehow it picked up on this ambiguity and the lack of clarity exactly what is going on over here. So, in order to really appreciate what's going on, we have to appreciate the fact, this is classic, and we would say so in the name of Rav Ashkenazi, the books of the Tanakh are much harder to learn than any other sefer that we have. And as a matter of fact, even the books of the Tanakh itself, the further back you go, the harder they get to understand. What better an example than the Torah itself? We have 5 Chumashim. Which of the Chumashim reads more, legibly? Which of the Chumashim is the easiest to read, to follow, to understand, to kind of grasp?
Bereshit?
Well, Bereshit, and it makes sense. What's going on in Bereshit is like, this is the easy parashah to understand. Chumash Devarim, Moshe Rabbeinu is talking to us, kind of, ein b'ain, eye level. You did too much of this, you didn't do enough of that. You don't have enough emunah, you have to work on this. He gives you a list of mitzvot, don't do avodah zarah. The mitzvot that are repeated in Sefer Devarim are mitzvot that are easy enough to understand. There aren't too many chukim in Sefer Devarim. There are some korbanot, but it's not that the parashiot in Chumash Devarim are abstract. There's not too much, supernatural occurrences in Sefer Devarim. It's pretty much almost a dialogue. Moshe Rabbeinu telling us what we do wrong, what we do right, and what we need to work on before we come to Eretz Yisrael. If you go back to Chumash B'Midbar, this is only one Chumash before, so from book number 5 to book number 4. Already Chumash B'Midbar has some very... it reads like a story. Here's what happened in B'Midbar, Naso, B'Ha'alotcha, things start to fall apart. We have some complicated sugyot. What happened? Miriam is speaking Lashon Hara. How come the nation all of a sudden loses its emunah? We have Parashat Meraglim, Korach. Their stories, they're just a little bit more difficult to understand. There aren't too many stories in Devarim. It's pretty straightforward. In Chumash B'Midbar, we have some of these stories that are maybe at a certain level you can understand them, and then you start asking questions, they really don't make sense. So you can learn them in a simple way, and you can learn them in a deeper, more involved, more sophisticated way, like with adult questions. Questions that we asked when we were kids. So Korach, what was the whole story with Korach? Well, he was a Rasha. Korach was looking for machloket, and he started fights. So if that's the case, then why did they use these mahtot, these golden shovels, on which they brought the ketoret? Why did they make from this a decoration for the Mizbeach? If he's a Rasha, so he goes to Gehinnom, and who needs this gold? Was there something good in him? Bad people do good things, good people do bad things. It's a little bit more complicated than I was able to understand when I was in kindergarten. Chumash Vayikra is all about korbanot. Half of it is anatomy. It's all fats and bloods and different parts of the liver, the diaphragm, what goes on the mizbeach, in what order, etc. I happen to love it, but I acknowledge that it's not for everyone. We have the laws of tzarat. We have all the dinim of tum'ah, tahara, discussion of the animals that are kosher and not kosher. These aren't necessarily the most logical of laws. If there is such a concept as tum'ah and tahara, I can kind of understand. I can compare it to clean and not clean. But that I should come to wonder why some animals are kosher and some animals aren't, logic and not logic, I don't know. Some have one siman, some have the other, but not both at the same time. The questions become a little bit more abstract at this level. Chumash Shemot, what's going on in Egypt is miracles, is the 10 plagues, we have the splitting of the sea. Some of this is not so easy to digest. We have the giving of the Torah itself, Matan Torah, Asarat Dibrot. So they hear sights and they see sounds. Ma'amad Har Sinai was not exactly the easiest thing to depict, for us to appreciate and to understand. This is much more abstract. The miracles are very different. Chet HaEgel, Bichlal, nobody understands what's going on over there. The Mishkan is also a little bit more distant from us. The Chumash Bereshit is the hardest Chumash to understand because the stories there make very little sense. We'll be honest, they don't make very much sense. Kain in heaven, the first pair of brothers, already one kills the other. Hashem speaks to him. Right? This is the Kuzari refers to this. He says, Nevi'im u'rotzchim. Like, he killed someone. Hashem doesn't talk to me, and I put on my tefillin. What happened? He killed his brother, and he gets nevuah. I've been tempted to try. Maybe I've been trying the wrong way. What's going on with Adam and Hawa and Eden Bichlal? Parashat Bereshit makes no sense anywhere. Nothing is logical in this parasha. Nothing you can insist. Logic will dictate, I come to this conclusion, and that's why this happened. The punishments they get for doing what they did, Noah necessarily makes sense in the whole story. I mean, these are very difficult stories to understand. Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov also, they're tzaddikim, but on such a high level. They're living in a world that's totally corrupt. It's almost illogical, irrational. There should be such tzaddikim walking around. They have tremendous emunah. Yosef and his brothers, Mitzrayim. So, the further back you go in the creation of the world, even within Chumash Bereshit, the further back you go towards Parashat Bereshit, it makes less and less sense. I don't mean to say that it's necessarily illogical. You just have to look really hard to find the logic. And this is true of most of the Tanakh in general. The Tanakh is not a history book. This isn't Josephus Flavius. This isn't, writing an account of what I saw, what I heard, how things... The Torah is not in chronological order. The Gemara itself says this, isn't it? Even the stories in the Chumashim are not necessarily in chronological order. How do you understand something? Why would you write something not in chronological order? Well, okay, if I'm writing emails, if I'm making plans, if I'm planning a vacation, hopefully do it in chronological order. Everything we do is in chronological order. Why would anybody write something not in chronological order? What else could you be teaching me that goes beyond time, where it's more important than the flow of the story? So for these reasons and many others, the Tanakh is very abstract. It's not written like a book. It's not meant to be read like a book. This isn't literature. These are books that were written with a very specific purpose, with many lessons to teach us. And time isn't necessarily one of them. Logic isn't necessarily one of them. You want logic? You can learn science. You can learn philosophy, if that's what interests you. Learning Torah has its own logic. It'll teach you things about a world in which different logic applies. That's all. Just don't look at it as a history book. You'll understand a lot more. If you try to insist on learning things very, exactingly the way you would learn other literature, it won't make any sense to you. You'll come out of it a heretic. For this reason, in many of the Ashkenazi yeshivot, it fell out of favor. People did not study Tanakh to this day. Go into yeshiva. I would say your typical Haredi yeshiva. No one learns Tanakh. They have them on the wall, and you can look up the meanings of some. No one actually sits and learns Tanakh. In the yeshivot, the kibbutz what they do. In the modern Orthodox yeshivot, that is very commonly done.
That's in the later yeshivot, right? Like when a person is above age 13 or something. But when they're young, they have to learn Mikra, no?
They learn Chumash. They learn maybe until they're 10. Until they're 9 or 10. They should be starting from Vayikra. Which is the least logical. How much sense? So at least I'll tell you my opinion. At least it's tangible. If I'm hanging a goat and I can point to its liver and its lungs and its kidneys, at least you know what the Pesukim are talking about. Talk about Chumash Bereshit. Where's this snake coming from? Why his legs? No, he doesn't. This tree, fruits that make you smart.
Yeah, but not everyone has goats to show to his kids.
Now, back in the day, they did. I can't show you a golden shovel like a Korach. I can't show you a rainbow. I can show you a goat. Come. And how many mitzvot can we learn from this goat? So, you have to have a tremendous respect for the Mikra in that sense. There are messages here, there are lessons here, but this isn't children's literature. This isn't everything I needed to know about life I learned in kindergarten. This is much more sophisticated than that. At the end of the day, this discussion about Iyov and when he lived is almost irrelevant. If the message of the book was, what can we learn from Iyov? Well, it depends when he lived. It doesn't actually depend on him. We still learn plenty of things from the book. Sephardi Iyov, you should know, is all over the place in the Midrashim. So the Midrashim learn many very deep concepts from his questions in Emunah, his questions of his depression, from his worries, his anxieties. Is Hashem with me? Is He against me? Is He testing me? Is it up to me? Is it up to Him? What's in my control? What's in His control? What happens if I do my best and I fail? What happens if I don't try? What happens? These are very difficult questions to answer. The Zohar Kadosh is full of references to Sephardi Iyov. And this, of all books, it's the one that's the most obscure, the one that doesn't have such a clear pedigree. Meaning, obviously, it's a book of Nebuah. It was accepted by Chazal, but it's not. Here's what Yeshaya said, and because we know Yeshaya and when he lived, this makes sense, and we accept it. So, the references to the different tzaddikim with whom he's associated probably lead us in the direction that this is the life of pretty much every tzaddik. It could be Adam, it could be Moshe. Adam did teshuvah in the end, right? It could be Moshe, it could be Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Everybody goes through these periods in their lives. This is Chazal's way, a very creative way of telling you, every generation we repeat the same joys and challenges and successes and failures. The Yetzer Hara hasn't changed. Our challenges in Emunah haven't changed. And so when you have in the Gemara Machloket, really every angle of the Machloket has a certain legitimacy to it. Why? Because they are representing an angle of the truth. It really effectively doesn't matter which generation was the generation of Iyov, because every generation is a generation of Iyov. Every generation has someone who goes through this. We all go through it in to a certain extent or to a certain degree. So the message of the book doesn't depend on this. Just, you should know there is such a thing. And if there's a machloket about it, also a very profound Kabbalistic concept, Sikh Harar Nikrag is classic when it comes to digesting machlokot. Wherever you find more than one opinion, you find there's something very deep. So deep that you can present one angle, you can present another. No one really grasps the depth of the thing. So if Rav so-and-so says this, Rav so-and-so says that, they're both tzaddikim, they're both geniuses. That we understand. But that it's such a deep concept and it's so hard to encompass, it's so hard to wrap your brain around it, already it should give you an indication there's something very, very profound going on. So if Sephardi Center isn't so commonly learned, the answer is simple. It's because it's so deep and there's so much kedusha to it. Yetzer Hara found us other things to do with our time. It's like a dusty book on the bookshelf. We don't deal with it too much. We said the same thing about Moreh Nevuchim, the Rambam, and it's true. All these books that kind of fell out of favor, it's not because there's nothing in them. It's not because nothing important or they're unintelligible. There's no depth to them. It's quite to the contrary. They're so deep that we're almost afraid to open them. So one of the more difficult challenges of Sefer Iyov, and really it's right in the beginning. Mechila, I did mean to make some photocopies today, and time was not on my side. We're told at the very introduction to the book that Iyov was a tzaddik. And the way the story, the details as they're laid out, there was a man who lived in the land of Uz. His name was Iyov. He was straight, Iyov. He was tam v'yashar v'yirei Elokim v'sar mira. He's whole. Tam doesn't mean like tamim, naive. They use in modern Hebrew. It's a terrible, terrible mistake. Tam means whole, maybe has the connotation of simple in the Haggadah. It just means a child who doesn't have too many questions. He's kind of at peace with himself. There it's kind of unfortunate because you should ask questions about Pesach. He doesn't have too many. Just, what is this? What's going on?
Innocent?
Innocent would be maybe another way of putting it. We say Kevas Tamim Ben Shana, Kevasim Ben Shana Tamimim by the Korbanot. It just means they don't have a mum. They don't have any defect.
Blemish, yeah.
Right, so Tamim is
pristine.
Tam, maybe more, whole, pristine, complete, entire, something like this. So, Shor Tam versus Shor Mu'ad.
Unadulterated.
A Shor Tam would be a bull that's innocent in that it's never done anything wrong, and a Mu'ad is one that's already damaged animals before. We have to be careful about a bull.
But it's a positive thing.
In his case, for sure.
It's like Noah.
Right, Tzaddik Tamim Haya B'Dorotahu. If it weren't for the fact that Pasuk is qualified, I would have agreed to that. Tamim Haya B'Dorotahu. He was considered
but he's tzaddik.
Tzaddik Tamim B'Dorotahu. That's the machloket in the Midrash. Noach, he's a tzaddik objectively or subjectively? If he's a tzaddik in this generation, today he would be a super tzaddik. I mean, he was living the most corrupt generation that ever lived. Or he was a tzaddik relative to his generation. In the generation of Abraham, he wouldn't have been considered a tzaddik. So I can't resolve a machloket that Chazal left open. There's truth to both sides. At any rate, he's wholesome is how Art School translates it. He's upright, he fears God, he stays away from evil. And he had 7 boys, 3 girls. Very wealthy man. He has cattle and he has goats and he has lambs, donkeys, etc. And his children were sitting down, they had a large meal, they're kind of, I guess, celebrating their wealth, enjoying some of the luxury. And this paragraph ends, the next one begins. It was on a particular day that B'nai HaElohim, we understand this everywhere it appears, like in Parashat Noach, by the way, or the end of Bereshit. B'nai HaElohim, we understand to mean the Malachim. Elohim, not as a name of Hashem, refers to judges. If we refer to it as Hashem Kodesh, B'nai HaElohim, we're referring to not literal children of God. We don't believe in such a concept, but reference to the different Malachim, the different officers, so to speak, in Hashem's service. And the Satan comes along with them. They all came to appear, so to speak, before Hashem, and the Satan comes with them. So one of the main characters in the Sephardi Center is the Satan. That's not so easy to digest. He's not featured very extensively in the rest of the books of the Tanakh, and this also raises some very interesting questions. What does this mean that the angels are convening? There's some kind of a convention of angels. What does it mean that the Satan comes along with them? He's an angel or he's not? What status does he have? We're told that the Satan came from, had just surveyed the land, so to speak, and was looking for someone to deal with. And he asked from Hashem permission to, work some of his magic on Iyov. Basically, what he's asking for permission to do is to take away his wealth. So Hashem says, "There's no man who's more righteous and who's more straight in my entire creation than him." And Satan says, "Okay, fine. That's because right now he's happy and he's healthy and he's wealthy. What happens if I take away some of what he has? Maybe then his attitude will change a little bit." So Hashem says, "Fine. I don't give you permission to kill him. But I give you permission to test him, to take away some of the things the comforts that he comes to enjoy." So he does, and Iyov's children die in a terrible collapse of the house. Bandits come, take his animals. Basically, he loses everything that he has in a matter of a day. And he's still standing. Hashem said to the Satan, "No, he's still able to withstand the trials. Let me try again." He makes him sick. And at this point, Iyov starts to fall into a terrible depression, we would call it today. So he has some very difficult questions about life. So, one major topic we need to discuss is what exactly is the nature of this Satan. We hear this all over the place. We have it in our tefillot every so often, right? Satan milfanenu ma'acharenu. We have in Arvit. We certainly don't believe as a religion that there is such a thing as an independently operating entity outside of God. So
It's himself.
It's who?
God.
So the Satan is God,
Yep.
is what you're saying. Well, that's a loaded sentence. that's a very it's a very
Everything
heavy
is
statement. I mean, how do you explain the Satan is God? So this one aspect of life becomes everything. Maybe Satan is one of the messengers of God. Maybe he also has a job. But to say the Satan is God is there is such a religion as Satanism, where there were and in many on all continents you found something of this concept that people worship. They bring the korbanot to the Satan, expecting that he should help them. Greek mythology is full of this. How there are gods of the underworld, how these entities that need to be appeased, they need to be satisfied, and if you want something to succeed, you have to pay them off, so to speak. Today we refer to this as the mafia, but back then it was, right.
Yeah, I was going to say we have
and then these questions become very complicated. Are we talking about an independently operated entity? Are we talking about and why would Hashem acquiesce to such a request? Why, if someone asks from Hashem, so to speak, permission to harm somebody, why should Hashem say yes? Somebody asked me for permission to harm somebody. I said, "No, what are you talking? Why can you hurt someone else? Why would you do this? Did he deserve what happened to him? Did he not deserve this?" There's no indication whatsoever. On the contrary, Hashem says, "No, he's straight, he's honest." And after a little bit of kivyachol, as if to say discussion, Hashem acquiesces. Hashem concedes. Go ahead. You do with him what you want, just don't harm him physically, don't kill him. Don't kill him. if this guy spends his whole life praying, he brings korbanot, he's an honest man, why harm him? Why take anything away from him? And if it's not for something he did? I thought, at least they told me when I was little, that bad things happen to bad people and good things happen to good people, and this is not so logical. This is not so intuitive. What's going on? So this whole concept of how do we identify the Satan? What are we referring to? What are we talking about? This is a discussion. This is a really heavy discussion. We have references in a few other books of the Nevi'im to this. If you're familiar with the Navi Zechariah, one of the last of the Nevi'im, we do have a nevuah that we read specifically by Hanukkah, Shabbat Hanukkah. It's in the Haftarot that we read. That he sees Yehoshua, the Kohen Gadol. Yehoshua was a Kohen Gadol. He had children who it's not so clear what happened there. According to the Gemara, they married girls that were not so appropriate for them. According to the Zohar, it sounds like they married girls that weren't ksharot l'kehuna. And Yehoshua knew about this. He didn't do anything about it. So he appears in Zechariah's nevuah. He has a prophetic vision, and he says that he sees Yehoshua, the Kohen Gadol, and he sees that he's dressed in bigadim tzoim. He's dressed in clothes that are filthy, that are dirty with excrement, with human waste. The Kohen Gadol would be dressed like this, and he says that Satan omed limino lesitno. So in his vision, he perceives what is, to him the Satan, and he says that he's standing to the right of him, lisitno, as if to say to prosecute him. He's being prosecuted for something. So what's he being prosecuted for? Being prosecuted for his sons marrying women that shouldn't have married, and he didn't do anything about it. And if you see someone doing something wrong and you don't protest, it's as if you acknowledge you're okay with it. So in his nevuah, he sees that Hashem helps him out, like he bails him out of this prosecution. So the nevuah goes on and it reads, "Vayomer Hashem el Satan, yigar Hashem b'cha Satan, yigar b'cha Hashem, habucher b'Yerushalayim, halo ze ud mutzal me'esh." That's where the expression comes from. He says Hashem, as if to say that Hashem shouts at the Satan. He removes him from the picture, saying that this is the man is a tzaddik. What happened with his children was one thing, as if he was to say he was forgiven for what had been wrong, but this was a prosecution that existed. In other words, there was something on his record, and if Hashem hadn't intervened to get rid of it, it would have stayed this way. So Rav Rebbe would begin this discussion with the etymology of the word, as was his routine in Kedusha. Rav Ashkenazi taught this way too. The word Satan, what does the etymology reveal? The root of the word comes from what? He has a name in Hebrew, which means it's a prophetically identified definition. We didn't make the name up. The name was given to us by the Nevi'im, which means it means something. It has a name, it has a significance to it. What does it mean, Satan?
I heard there's
written in Hebrew, sin tet nun, right? Not with a samech, with a sin.
There's a connection with the concept of temptation.
I don't know about temptation so much as, Satan would be drawn from the same root as Sotah.
Okay.
Remember the story of Sotah, who appears in Hebrew, by the way, with a sin in Mikra. Why it became a sin afterwards is an interesting question, but originally it appears with a sin. So what's the definition of a Sotah? Listot in Hebrew means to deviate. You have a straight path and you deviate from the path, you go the other way. So the Satan is what causes us to deviate from the path, what causes us to miss our objectives, to miss our goals. A Sotah, a woman, as it appears in Parashat Naso, is a woman who deviated from her husband, a woman who went, or suspected anyway, more than suspected, she was warned about it, she did it anyway. So she's a woman who has this habit of deviating from the straight path. So the Gemara says very emphatically, Satan, Yetzer Hara, Malach HaMavet, they're one and the same. There is no distinction between the three of them. Meaning what? These are all synonyms for the same force, we'll say. The same concept. The same force that causes death is the one that tempts us to do the wrong thing, the one that causes us to deviate. It's all the same thing. It's all the same thing. So the Satan, let's say Yetzer Hara. the force of prosecution, the force that causes us to be prosecuted for making mistakes. And so his job, so to speak, is this. His job, his goal, as if we're talking about a person. This is an abstract concept. This is the drive, the instinct, the inclination that we have, the natural appetite that we have for destruction, for doing the wrong thing, for going the wrong way, etc. Does someone have to do something wrong in order to be tempted by Yetzer Hara? Think about it. Is it fair? Forget that I get punished. You're going to punish me for something I didn't do. That's injustice. I didn't do anything wrong. Why are you hitting me? What did I do? Is there something criminal or unjust about testing someone, about tempting someone? I think every one of us has temptations in different things. You know your Yetzer Hara. You've probably seen the Yetzer Hara of other people in action. And that's for ease of discussion. Let's take politicians. They're an easy target. They have a desire, an appetite for fame, for fortune, for money, for girls, for whatever. So all the Yetzer Hara in the world are bundled into one. Here in America, it's the Senate, the House of Representatives, and the White House. We have 3 different branches of the legislature. So, what makes the politicians so easily corrupted and so easily tempted? I mean, you don't need to do anything wrong to have an appetite, to have a desire, to have an inclination, to have an instinct. There's nothing unjust about that. What's a little bit hard to digest by Iyov is that other people were involved. So his children died. Why did they die? Well, the commentary discusses, talk about it a little bit next week. Maybe they were a little bit full of themselves. Maybe they enjoyed partying a little bit too much.
But for whatever, if it's a parable in and of itself, then there's no real people to die. It's just something to take away from him.
We have to read it as if as if it's literal in that sense that, even an allegorical reference to someone dying is not to be taken lightly. Real people die all the time. It's something that we have to appreciate as a part of life and something we have to learn to get used to. So we'll leave the kids out of it for now. The fact that Iyov was tested, in other words, that he was tempted, so here he wasn't tempted by a woman, he wasn't tempted by money, he wasn't tempted by pride. The temptation was the temptation of depression. There is such a thing, there's a really Yetzer Hara to depression. As a matter of fact, if you're familiar with Rav Nachman Breslev, some of us are more than others, Rav Nachman has a whole, without pointing fingers and making faces, guys, it's unnecessary. Rav Nachman has this discussion in which he actually concludes that the ultimate victory of Yetzer Hara against a man or a woman is Yush, is depression to the point of desperation, abandonment. It's one thing if you try, you don't succeed. You try again, it's still not working out the way you want it to. When you come to a point that you don't even want to try anymore, it's over. It's done. I've had students like this, unfortunately. Maybe I did it to them, I don't know. It's one thing when a student comes to class and tries, okay, not all of them come on time. Some students from some cultures find it exceptionally difficult to wake up before 2 or 3 in the afternoon. I ask me why this is. Not all of them speak French. I don't know why you're laughing. So, some of them speak Spanish. So it's difficult. It's a challenge. You're not encouraged by your failures. I acknowledge this. But there's a real temptation. There's a real temptation to give up. It's a Yetzer Hara like any other Yetzer Hara. It's probably the worst of the Yetzarim because this Yetzer, instead of getting you to get up and do something you shouldn't, look at something you shouldn't be looking at, eat something you shouldn't be eating, go somewhere you shouldn't be going, say something you shouldn't be saying, this Yetzer shuts you down completely. You lose everything. In fact, you give up on everything, you relinquish everything, and you don't even want to try anymore. It is an absolute and total disaster. And it probably is the number one Yetzer Hara of our generation. Yael works in social work. You have a little bit of a taste of this. I see this in many different areas of life. It's a pretty incredible thing. In our generation where people are so used to living in luxury and people have convenience and we have the internet and everything's electronic and you don't even have to go to the bank to cash checks anymore, take a picture and it's done. We have it easier, theoretically anyway, than any other generation did in history. And we have terrible bouts of depression. People commit suicide, people give up, People, and someone has to be on the clock. People give up, people give in, and they are capable of doing so many things that they get confused, they regret their decisions, and they end up going nowhere. Or, Rav Ratbi put it very poetically, there is nothing more depressing in Olam Hazeh than infinite possibilities. Right? I have to repeat it in Hebrew if you don't get the... he said, En Yeush Yoter Gadol Ba'olam Hazeh Miribui Hafsharuyot, is how he put it. There is nothing more depressing than this. Why? Because in antiquity, if my father was a carpenter, I wasn't learning computers. I wasn't going into a course of study for accounting or law, or I was going to be a carpenter just like my father was. So that decision was made for me, and I could be a good carpenter or a bad carpenter, but I would practice, hopefully I would get it right by the time I was old enough to strike out on my own. If my father was a salesman, I might learn to be a salesman. If he was a shochet, I'd learn shechita. If he was a safar, I'd learn safrut. I mean, there are only so many things you had, you could choose from back in the day. So these decisions were made for you. You had less anxiety. You didn't have remorse. You didn't have harata. I decided to study history, but I really like biology. So I went into finance, but I really like engineering. And I want to study English, but I'm really interested in Spanish. So no matter what you do, you have this infinity of options and alternatives that will never leave you alone. So people change their majors in college anywhere between 5 and 7 times on average, and people move apartments 3 times a year, even though they sign a lease for a year. It's okay, we'll find a sublease and sublet to somebody else, and if you're sitting on 10 apartments and you can't live in any of them because you have plans for each and every one of them. I went here, but it was too big, it was too small, it was too hot, it was too cold, it was too bright, it was too dark. I'd say the same thing about husbands and wives, but I think you get the point. I'm going out with this guy, but this guy's nicer, he's taller, he's shorter, he's fatter, he's skinnier, he's got more hair, he's got less hair, he's too much hair, he doesn't have enough hair. These things go on ad infinitum in any possible direction. So there is Yetzer Hara for depression. In the case of Iyov, he is confronted with the challenge of being drawn into this bottomless pit. So the Satan was given permission to do something he does for everybody, which is try to get you to deviate, try to distract you from doing what you're supposed to be doing. He can do it by tempting you to do something. And then there's a whole world of temptations not to do anything. This is the book of depression, the book of anxiety, the book of thoughts that can go in any direction, of actions, deeds, occurrences, phenomena that can be interpreted in any given way. And at some point you can either choose to interpret them positively and to encourage yourself and motivate yourself and get up and do, or you can sit and prophesy for about 50-something chapters and deliberate a little bit, but this is the major temptation that Iyov had. So at least this much will get done. We'll have a deeper discussion about the Satan next week, chapter 2, on this topic of who exactly is our buddy, the Simchat Nun, and what are the tools at his disposal. Why does he get permission, so to speak, to do these things? And is this ultimately for good, for bad, whether without Hashem's permission or acknowledgement or consent? These are fascinating questions that we'll just have to pick up next week because we promised to stop after 45 minutes. Okay. Take a couple minutes if you want to have something to